Welcome back to the 7th grade Mustache. On today's episode, we'll be speaking about ugly architecture. Geomancy was practiced by people from all social classes. It was one of the most popular forms of divination throughout Africa and Europe, particularly during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, although in Renaissance magic, geomancy was classified as one of the 7 forbidden arts, along with black magic, hydromancy, aeromancy, pyromancy, chiromancy, and scapulomancy. So, it is important to understand the story of place and what created a region's essential characteristics, how to choose a region in which to live in that will help you thrive because they resonate with you. A way to understand why human regional cultures are literally created from the ground up and generated through adaptation to local, natural conditions. The geological formation of the landscape is the beginning of the story of place and of how geological processes create an essential tone that is often picked up by human culture. The value of indigenous peoples' history cannot be underestimated. It is a treasury of knowledge embedded in native places, names, habitat management practices, survival techniques, and seasonal festivals that can guide you to get to know and live in harmony with the spirit of the place.
So when I was a kid, I was talking to this lady, and she was telling me why she moved to Omaha. She said, my son had real bad asthma, and Omaha had high humidity, and that was going to help him with it. So, and that's what the doctor told her, like the pediatrician. On the same token, on the flip side, I remember being a kid and somebody had moved away, and that's because the doctor said, hey, Arizona would be a good spot because it's dry. Like literally, doctors were different back then. That doctor literally just sent away a patient. Like, look, hey, this is what's best for you. You need to move here.
That doctor also probably smoked cigarettes in front of his patients too.
Hey, that motherfucker probably healthy, still alive, healthy as hell. But you're talking about regional stuff. The bottom line was that literally the doctor said, this is what's best for your family. If you want your son or your daughter to get over this asthma, or you want your son to get over this breathing situation, you should move to a drier area. And they did it, and the kid thrived. That's our age. But that's just one of these things where a doctor wouldn't do that anymore. A doctor is more worried about making money than a patient's health. And we always talk about that on the podcast, but here on 7th grade Mustache, I'm telling you, I remember that kind of shit. I remember those conversations where they were like, hey, your kid has a skin problem. It'd be that he or she would be better in this environment, and they would move away, and whatever that was, how many of these guys do we remember not having asthma after they moved away? like literally. So I just think, one, the practices are different now. Two, I remember a general practitioner and used to know what the fuck they were talking about. Like, you can get a doctor nowadays. All these doctors are specialists. Hey, I'm a toenail fungus doctor. I'm an anal wart doctor, and you got all these. But back in the day, that doctor knew everything, and they would say, okay, you should try this, or you know what, a home remedy would be better. They literally would tell you that. Like, I had a friend. His ex-wife is a dermatologist, and she'll tell you in a second, bacon grease. And people are like, what? Yeah, you have psoriasis or whatever, bacon grease. Throw that shit on there and walk out in the sun for 35 minutes. And the vitamin D, and she can break it down on a scientific level. But the fact of the matter is, instead of her selling you a cream, she'll tell you in a second that you need vitamin D. You need to put some bacon grease on there, and that's what's going to take care of your situation. So I think that regional stuff is way more powerful than we give it credit.
The practice of Feng Shui, a form of geomancy, began in China. There, in China, town planners and building designers have followed Feng Shui practices for over 6,000 years. Historically, Feng Shui was used vastly to position infrastructures such as ancestral tombs, residential homes, and agricultural fields in an auspicious manner to bring luck to their family, their land, and businesses. Feng Shui holds a high status in China within their architecture history. One of the most important Feng Shui principles used in architecture is leaning against mountains and facing waters. This has been widely used at either a large or small scale. Now I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to tell you something. Think about the layout of our neighborhood. Think about my street in particular. I lived on a hill that was in front of a very big hill. And what was in front of my house? A large field, a forest that was on a sloping hill that was on a water table. Right here, they just said one of the important Feng Shui principles in architecture is leaning against mountains, facing waters.
That's dope.
Think about how active my house was.
How about this? Think about the fact that a lot of this shit is lost on us today. Like that's you talking about some deep shit. Like, okay, I'm literally on like Council Bluffs. I'm literally on a mountain facing water. Like, how many people even know that that's a thing? Like right now, they tell you you're not supposed to sleep with your head to the north. You got motherfuckers right now sleeping with their head to the north. Don't know why they're so miserable.
That whole thing about your head shouldn't face north or south, that comes from Chinese wisdom.
Yes, medicine, Chinese medicine.
So I can tell you, because I've been practicing this for a long time. In the winter and autumn, your head should be pointing to the east. And then in the spring and summer, your head should be pointing to the west. So a good way to remember this is that in the wintertime, the sunlight should pick your head up and rise you up out of the bed. In the summertime, the sun should be shining in your face to wake you up in the morning. What this means is twice a year, you're going to be shifting, not your whole bedroom, just the orientation of your bed.
Of your bed.
Now, people get so entrenched and fixed in their living condition that they're unwilling to do this, and they fall into bad health.
But they don't know why. They have no clue why.
If you can get your mate, if you're living with someone or your spouse, to agree to this, so every 6 months you're changing the direction that you're sleeping in. You're moving your bed from this side to that side. It's not a big deal, because what it's going to do is it's going to guarantee you long health.
Well, hold it. See, there's other ways around this. If you don't want to rearrange your room, you might want to sleep in a different room. Look, you got 2 or 3 bedrooms in your house, bro. You could have your summer room and you could have your winter room. You dig what I'm saying?
Yes, but I'm talking for people who don't have that luxury. And for people, if you got a house full of people, you can't do that. You know what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is just have the wherewithal to move your bed from one side to the other twice a year. That's all. That's all you're doing. And what you're doing is the flow of energy through the meridians in your body is aligned with the meridians and the flow of energy across the earth.
Here's another thing that stuff I read always said not to face north. I never heard the part about not facing south, but I'm not arguing. I'm just simply saying it's clear that this is a real thing. But the thing is, you know, anytime you try to read anything that's, I don't want to use the word else, anything that's homeopathic, they act like, oh, you're a fucking conspiracy theorist. Like, nah, bro.
No. What's going on in that situation is that you're talking to an ignorant person. And an old lady once told me is you never give jewels to mules. It's one of the reasons why secret societies don't give all the information to the public, which, you know, I agree and disagree with. But common people in general are stupid. They're stupid by design. They were grown to be like that.
100.
So then there are people that you can discuss these things with. But see, as you can tell over time, there's a sea change, and a rising tide lifts all ships, because I saw the sea change coming in the 1990s with the explosion of like all this new age stuff. There were all these conventions, and you know that's when Whole Foods just took off. You know, everybody wanted to be healthy and doing yoga. Yoga is all over the place. You can go by a bunch of yoga studios everywhere. Ain't a damn Indian person in there. But this is what I'm saying, is that this awareness has spread of wellness. So it goes against the whole drugging and cutting of the whole pharmaceutical surgical industry versus let me work on my own self-maintenance.
Sometimes things have meanings, and when you try to talk about medical, I don't know what's the word. When you try to talk about this homeopathic, new age, whatever you want to call it, you try to talk about this stuff, and you're like, hey, you know, this means this means that, and people literally will argue with you. I just saw this video. You're gonna laugh your ass off. So the guy that Lululemon guy, that I guess that's not his real name, and the reason he named his products Lululemon is because he's racist. He doesn't like Asian people, and he didn't want Asian people buying his product. So he literally gave it a name that they wouldn't be able to pronounce. And so I'm like, if this motherfucker sit here and had that much wherewithal to think of how to fuck with people, that should tell you that a lot of this information is deliberate. How you build your house is deliberate. The way your door faces and the way your bedroom faces are super important. But the thing is, we're not taught that. When you're in kindergarten, you're taught ABCs. You're taught how to be a good worker. You're taught how, you have a cut, you need to go to the nurse. Instead of you learning how to fix it yourself. That's the one thing. When we were kids, we were in a couple different groups, campfire, Boy Scouts, all this different shit. They teach you how to fix stuff or how to take care of yourself. And that right there gives you a whole different idea of, okay, so if I'm learning how to bandage or brace my arm because I broke something, then some of the stuff I'm learning from these other cultures or some of this older information I'm learning is much more relevant to me. But if you're just going to school and it teaches you how to depend on other people, it doesn't teach you how to learn from other people or learn from other cultures or how to medically take care of yourself. You're literally being made into a consumer. That's the ultimate brainwashing.
On this day in history, duct tape became the first person to shoehorn the term Lululemon into a talk about geomancy. So, Feng Shui brings nature and architecture into one circle. It focuses energy to create harmony between individuals and their environment. In Western culture, Masonic groups and other secret societies utilize astrocartography to build the foundation of American cities. The Masons that planned American cities required the Moor, Benjamin Banneker, who was the only one around that could use astrocartography effectively to design the layout of Washington, D.C.
D.C., yep. Remember, they lost the original plan. He came in and just did it from memory.
Right. This skill of astrocartography is a rare talent, and one that the Moors had used extensively. Astrocartography is an astrological technique that maps the regions that possess planetary alignments in harmony with our psychological makeup and conducive to your self-actualization. Sacred geometry is the study and application of the underlying proportions found universally in all of creation. That forms the basis for the material world. The physics of the ancient world, the way early humans sought to understand creation and the universe through astute observation of nature, shamanic trances, and mystical experiences. Mundane geometry is a branch of mathematics, whereas sacred geometry is cosmology, philosophy, psychology united into a single subject.
And we talked about Benjamin Banneker before, but the theory is that he was a Dogon. He's from the Dogon tribe of West Africa. And they're the ones that, know about Sirius. I quote the book. Look up the book. It's called A Serious Problem. And the Dogon tribe was in the 1800s and the early 1910s, whenever they get them.
No. They've been around for thousands of years, but when the white folks came over there and like,
that's white
y'all niggas doing some crazy shit over here.
When white folks met them, they were already familiar with the Sirius B and these different stars that we can't.
For thousands of years.
Yeah, years.
Now it's said that they originally migrated from the Nile
Egypt.
Delta.
Yeah, that they are the original Egyptians, as when those Vandals and those barbarians came in and took over, and
they bounced
200 A.D. Yeah, they went west. So, but yeah, just look up the Dogon tribe, and Benjamin Banneker is a prime example. How else? You got to understand, they love to make it seem like slaves didn't know anything, and that these people were ignorant people. No, that man had that knowledge, whether it was through his DNA. Or it was through his training before he got here, but he was fully aware of all the things that these Masons worship. He understood it. He understood the layout of the city, and there are certain things that are being done, certain powers that are being conveyed if you build your city a certain way. So yeah, look up Benjamin Banneker, look up the Dogon tribe, and You will be impressed. You can't help but be impressed.
Brutalism is a style of architecture that lasted from the 1950s to the 1970s, characterized by simple, block-like, hulking concrete structures. It spread throughout Europe, the Soviet Union, the United States, and the rest of the world. Emerging from the modernist movement of the late 19th century to the mid-20th century, originating in England. It's an offshoot of modernism. Brutalist buildings are popular locations in film and television series about urban dystopias. Brutalism appears aesthetically crude and is what you'd expect from a stark government building, university, library, parking garage, or high-rise housing. It's rough, looks unfinished and minimalistic, and lacks flourishes of classical beauty. It's blocky, it has a heavy appearance, utilitarian feel, small windows, rough, unfinished surfaces. Goldfinger was one of the modern architects called upon to rebuild and restock London's housing supply after the ravages of World War II. But not everyone is a fan of his work. James Bond's author, Ian Fleming, famously hated Goldfinger's aesthetic so much that he named Bond's nemesis after him. In the book, The Naked Capitalist, Dr. Cleon Skousen reviews the book Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley. This book by Carol Quigley has been quoted and studied by the likes of Bill Clinton and everybody in Clinton's circle, Barack Obama. Carol Quigley was a mentor to Bill Clinton, but Carol Quigley's book reveals how some of the richest people in the world have supported communism and socialism, and why would they support what appears to be the pathway to their own destruction. Dr. Quigley has been associated with many of these dynastic families of the super rich. So Dr. Skousen, therefore, writes as an authority on the world's secret power structure. The English literary critic William Epson once wrote, "The reason an English audience can enjoy Russian propagandist films is that the propaganda is too remote to be annoying. Perhaps this is why American artists and bohemians have so often taken to the political iconography of far-flung regimes, in ways both romantic and ironic."
A couple of examples. How many of these stars who have like $100 million all of a sudden like, yeah, we should have socialism now? Like, yeah, your family's set. If we were going to go into socialism right now or communism right now, you would be way up here because
it's always rich people or people who don't have kids.
Yeah, they're so comfortable with it because the reason is because if you were to do that, yeah, we're taking care of everybody. They need that, yeah, but I'm good. Like I'll be in a position.
I got mine. Fuck y'all.
Yeah, fuck y'all. Or another example that always frustrates me. I had a really good lawyer. He just retired, but one of the things he was a big gun guy. But he's a super liberal guy, not in a bad way. But he's like, yeah, but if they made guns illegal, I wouldn't need them. I'm like, no, he literally has an arsenal. like, yeah, you've already acquired whatever you need, and since there's no gun registry, people don't exactly know how much you got. And that's what frustrates me is that the idea that I'm good, but I would abide by the law. So you would turn your guns in? Oh, hell no. But, if people couldn't buy guns anymore, I completely understand why. I don't understand why. That there are so many things where there are segues to freedom, segues to intelligence, that kind of stuff. And then they basically just change the narrative. Guns are for dumb people. No, they're not. But it's just really frustrating that people who have all these different things, if the government changed its mind, I would agree with them. Like, no, that doesn't make sense. Oh, I'm worth $200 million, but I think socialism is a good idea. What you're saying is that you don't think anybody else could achieve, or you don't want anybody else to compete with you. You're literally lowering the playing field to where they can't compete with you, and they can never get what you got. Never. You fucking hypocrite.
One nation's tedious socialist regime One nation's tedious socialist realism is another's radical exotica.
You saying exotica, so these motherfuckers are worshiping it. These motherfuckers are desiring it like it's a fashion statement. But you want to try socialism for a little while? You fucking dickhead. Yeah, yeah.
The work of such artists as Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and William de Kooning wound up being part of a secret CIA program during the height of the Cold War aimed at promoting American ideals abroad. They were on a long leash. They participated in several exhibitions secretly organized by the CIA, such as the New American Painting, which visited major European cities in 1958 through 59, and included such modern primitive works as surrealist William Basioti's Dwarf and Tournament by Adolf Gottlieb. Avant-garde in America has never been much appreciated by the average citizen, to put it mildly. American main streets harbor undercurrents of distrust or outright hatred for out-there art world experimentation, a trend that filters upward and periodically erupts in controversies over congressional funding for the arts. In the 1990s, several news articles were published on the CIA's role in promoting abstract expressionism, and it describes these attitudes during the Cold War period. The artists themselves, many were communists and barely acceptable in the America of the McCarthyite era, and certainly not the sort of people normally likely to receive U.S. government backing. That is why the PSYOP worked, because ugly, talentless art and ugly architecture that is going up the same time is all part of one big demoralization campaign. Next came MKUltra, COINTELPRO, and the demolition of the anti-war Vietnam resistance from within by government saboteurs. So, there is a part of this book called The Naked Capitalist that I wanted to read from. It is a very interesting quote. And it is from a conversation between the author, Skousen, and a person that he interviewed named Bella Dodd. He asked, "Who is trying to take over the world?" And she says, "I think the communist conspiracy is merely a branch of a much bigger conspiracy." The above statement was made by Bella Dodd, a former member of the National Committee of the U.S. Communist Party. Perhaps this is an appropriate introduction to the review of Carol Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope. Dr. Dodd said she first became aware of some mysterious super leadership right after World War II, when the U.S. Communist Party had difficulty getting instructions from Moscow on several vital matters requiring immediate attention. The American communist hierarchy was told that any time they had an emergency of this kind, they should contact any one of three designated persons at the Waldorf Towers in New York City. Dr. Dodd noted that whenever the party obtained instructions from any of these three men, Moscow always ratified them. What puzzled Dr. Dodd was the fact that not one of these three contacts was a Russian, nor were any of them communist. In fact, all three were extremely wealthy American capitalists. Dr. Dodd said she would certainly like to find out who was really running things. And then Skousen had also observed a number of strange developments which seemed to point to a conspiratorial control center higher and stronger than either Moscow or Peiping, China. For example, when Harry Dexter White, then Undersecretary of the U.S. Treasury during World War II, was discovered by the FBI to be a Soviet agent, the White House was immediately informed. But instead of being fired or arrested, Harry Dexter White was appointed as the new executive director of the U.S. mission to the International Monetary Fund of the United Nations. He was also given a substantial increase in salary. J. Edgar Hoover was amazed. Attorney General Herbert Brownell Jr. stated publicly that President Truman knew White was a Soviet spy when he made the appointment. Why would men in charge of the world's massive financial problems want an exposed Soviet agent such as Harry Dexter White to occupy such a highly important position in the World Bank? And why, in the name of common sense, would the President of the United States approve such a thing? I heard both congressmen and intelligence officers quizzically exclaiming, "What is going on?" It was not long after that the former chairman of the Federal Reserve Board began advocating economic aid and comfort to communist China. His speech was all the more shocking because American people had just been jolted by a congressional hearing in which had been shown with sworn testimony that the U.S. State Department had either recklessly allowed or deliberately propelled 600 million Chinese allies into the grip of the communist Chinese leaders. Nevertheless, here was this American capitalist and former chairman of the Federal Reserve Board telling a large meeting that the United States should immediately undertake extensive trade with Red China. He said, "We never fight the people we trade with." And Skousen then said to himself, "Well, we certainly had to fight Japan in spite of all the oil and scrap we sold them just before World War II. It did not seem possible that this famous international banker would have forgotten such an elementary lesson so quickly. A couple years later, while visiting Central and South America, I noticed that certain well-known American banks were extremely powerful in controlling the politics and economic affairs of many Latin American countries." What does that sound like to you? That's CIA.
Some CIA bullshit.
That's clear. That's the movie Clear and Present Danger.
Mm-hmm.
But what was baffling about it was the fact that the political regimes which these American banks supported were often virtual dictators who promoted socialism and engaged in confiscation of privately owned industries, including American industries. Many of these bank-sponsored regimes were openly pro-communist. So here you have this basically this report from the 1940s going into the 60s showing how this communist influence has been in the highest stations of American government. But above that, even above there's something controlling above the communists. Now you and I have talked about this many times on the show. We know what it is. But it's important that we go back in history and we point at significant events or people and quotes from these people so you can see what led us to what we are living right now and why there's all these weird things going on. So I want to explain why I call this episode Ugly Architecture. Because in my adult life, I have worked in a lot of skyscrapers. I visit large cities all around the world. And I see different things. I see these things that Duct Tape and I talk about where, people discuss Tartaria and you see these old, World's Fairs from like the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah, 20th century, yep.
And you see these buildings that apparently were just built overnight. And it's beautiful architecture.
I mean, thick marble. Shit is just like inspirational.
But check it out. That isn't built anymore. What is built is the remnants of modernist, brutalist architecture. Now, when you look at the old Planet of the Apes movies, and they show what was supposed to be the 1990s in the 60s, it was brutalist architecture. And it was an oppressive society, and everybody in government wore gray and black. And when you drive by a penitentiary, when you drive by a jail, look at the way it looks. Look at the way it's designed. It is not designed to psychologically rehabilitate anybody from its appearance.
Oh, no, not at all.
It's supposed to do the opposite. It's supposed to psychologically entrench break you down, and put you into a hole. Now, when you go through some major train stations in major cities, it has a similar effect. There are the schools that they're building now have a similar effect. So, in contrast, my high school that I attended had a black man that was lynched on the front steps when it was the Capitol building 100 years before. And so this building is a beautiful building. Am I right? Like it was like going to high school in a place that looked like the Parthenon, but like with a building inside the Parthenon. Okay.
It looks like a library. It looks like a museum.
It looks prestigious. And the crazy part about it is right across was a dope ass art museum that was made from pink marble that was brought by the railway system from Georgia. So you have these beautiful classical style buildings. And then everything now looks ugly as fuck. It's not beautiful at all.
It's sterile. It's very sterile.
It's very sterile. It's utilitarian, and it looks oppressive. And I'm like, what is the motivation behind this? Why are architects designing buildings like this?
What in the USSR is going on here, people?
Exactly.
Because when we were kids, we grew up on buildings that were Art Deco. And let me clarify.
See, Art Deco was different from what we're talking about.
Yeah. It's
Art
vibrant.
Deco was the 1930s.
Marble. Yeah, but these buildings are beautiful buildings, solid buildings. You would walk in a building and there'd be a mural with marble squares and stuff in it, and you're like, oh shit, that's a peacock.
But this ugly architecture, they're using it in civic architecture, in civic environments where the common people will come and go. So then there's not an open sense of the republic. It's the exact opposite. It's that we are in a repressive, controlled environment. I've worked in a federal government for years, in a federal building for years for the federal government. And that building had that feeling. The inside of the building that I work in had this brutalist design, exactly the way they're describing it now. Now, what's funny is that this library, the main library that was in downtown Omaha, the Clark W. Clark Library that was in downtown. It was a brutalist design, but and inside that library was dope. It was dope as fuck, man.
The outside looked like just like a brick, but the inside was completely different.
Not a brick. It looked more like it was concrete pillars, and it looked like something from a 1970s sci-fi movie.
Yeah. like they're arguing over food. Like, where's the food?
Yeah, like something from like Logan's Run meets Soylent Green.
The Russians.
Exactly.
But another thing when it comes to the theory of America and capitalism and all this is that socialism was always an underlying tone of America. And people, what I mean by that is we don't agree with it, but if you structure this correctly, socialism will be there. And that's something that we always talk about in the podcast going on past 2 years, is that if you don't pay attention, you can achieve socialism without a government coup. You're going to achieve socialism without the government. What happens is you make everything too expensive for anybody to afford. And what's going to happen is that they'll have to give you as Elon Musk, which I'll be warning y'all people, listen to what this motherfucker says, not what he does, because his grandiose gestures are bullshit. He's like, well, I think in time that everybody's going to receive an allowance. That's socialism. So these ultra rich don't mind socialism as much as you think. They don't like the idea of socialism when they're on the bottom coming up. But once they get at the top, then socialism is fine, because there is an element of wealthy and privileged people that come and go as they please. But the common man can't afford to do that. The common person can't afford to do that. And so what happens is, one of the things they talked about at that damn convention overseas was that people won't own cars, probably won't even own clothes. You won't own the place where you live. I'm like, are you listening?
That's communism.
Yeah, well, it's not just communism. One of the things about capitalism is that if you work hard enough, you can achieve something. Or if you have a product or a design or an idea that you can market it, and you can become rich. You can get you can. And it's not about being rich. You can be much more comfortable. The bottom line is the biggest thing about wealth is owning property. And in all these societies, they're telling you not to own property, or that you can't own property, or you won't own property. That right there is fucking with you. You need to make sure that you still have your ancestral land. I know what happens. Grandpa dies, uncle dies too. Then all of a sudden you want to, let's sell this and get rich. and you motherfuckers aren't even getting rich. So pay that little bit of tax, a little $35 a year, and keep those 15, 20, 150, 300, whatever acres your grandpappy and grandma had, because that's real wealth. And if you got to sell off a little bit, or you got to sell some trees off it so you can have some money to pay the taxes on it, then you do that shit. But don't let these motherfuckers convince you by parading this lifestyle in front of you of excess. The lifestyle of rich and famous was what it was back in the day, but now it's reality shows where you're sitting here watching rappers and fucking socialites do all this bullshit. But the thing is, they don't tell you how to invest or how to get it or how they maintain it. They don't tell you about their brands and what they're doing. Like, you see them, but you don't fully understand it. And that's by design. So that the whole idea is that, yeah, I can wear Kanye shoes, but I can't be Kanye. That bullshit. And so you got to be careful about that, because the brainwashing is so profound and so far-reaching. But yeah, you need to own property. That's real wealth. Gold, property, that's wealth. That will always be there. You need to have that shit.
Check this out. From the point of view of any old-fashioned, Constitution-oriented American, the McCarthy hearings were not only important, they were enough to leave the people in a state of shock. As for their accuracy, what else can you deduct from a high government official who was asked whether or not he is part of the communist conspiracy, and he pleads the Fifth Amendment? Why is it inaccurate to say that such a man has the earmarks of a security risk? Carol Quigley points out that in 5 years, McCarthy did not prove that any person in the State Department was a communist. If he means in court, that is true, but that is the job of the Department of Justice, not a congressional committee. The McCarthy hearings exposed enemies of the American people in high places. McCarthy's committee then recommended that the more rigorous security laws be adopted, and that was all senatorial committee was supposed to do. Carol Quigley's statement that McCarthy did not know what a communist was is completely irresponsible. Note that Quigley documents practically nothing throughout his entire book. What can be documented is the fact that McCarthy was finding not only communists, but those who were hiding communists, promoting communists, hiding communists, and lying under oath to protect communists. Whew. After the McCarthy episode, the American people virtually went back to sleep. Nevertheless, the specter of communism returned to haunt them again and again. In 1955, it was the Formosa Crisis. In 1956, it was the Suez Canal, followed shortly by the tragic and disgraceful handling of the Hungarian Revolution. In 1957, the State Department sponsorship of Fidel Castro as the George Washington of Cuba set the stage for the betrayal of Cuba and her 6 million allies to a brutal communist conquest. I'm going to say this again. In 1957, the State Department sponsorship of Fidel Castro. Dude, as the George Washington of Cuba, this is Bin Laden. You know what I'm saying? This is Saddam Hussein. They do this shit over and over and over. In 1958, the Soviet Union sponsored Nasser, Nesser, Nasser, in the conquest of 2 independent Arab states. U.S. Marines had to land in Lebanon, and both the British and U.S. had to combine to prevent the conquest of Jordan. In 1959, the fall of Cuba had become a bizarre reality. While Castro was brutally communizing this island 90 miles from U.S. soil, the State Department was continuing to trumpet the deliberate falsehood that Castro was not really a communist. The State Department. The man on the Cuban desk of the State Department was himself a personal friend of Fidel Castro and a former member of the ABC Revolutionary Movement of Cuba. Well, damn, look at that. Prelude to a showdown. So it was Cuba, as much as any other single factor, which made the blood of Americans boil and caused the people of the United States to turn away from the Republicans in the election of 1960. About the same time, a few Americans among the Republicans and Democrats had begun to do their homework on the communist conspiracy. A solid front of pro-Americans and anti-communists had begun to emerge from among America's long-suffering silent majority. In 1958, J. Edgar Hoover came out with his Masters of Deceit book, and during the same year, the reviewer's book was published under the title of The Naked Communist. By 1961, both books were on the national bestseller list. Study groups and seminars and radio and TV broadcasts, i.e. podcasts today, began springing up all over the country. Soon names such as George S. Benson, Dean Mannion, Dan Smoot, and Fred Schwartz, and Billy James Hargis had become familiar to readers and reviewers in the mass communication media. It was a grassroots movement which, unknown to its participants, was racing toward a head-on collision with the communist establishment coalition. It was Cleon Skousen was invited to serve on several of the faculties which were organized to speak at high schools, colleges, and community gatherings. Everywhere, the crowds were tremendous, and people were beginning to back these voices that were speaking out against communism. So there was one gathering of about more than 10,000 people in one day, and it was a week-long seminar that had the same success. Beginning in Los Angeles with an average attendance of only 200, the seminars increased until a year later and were meeting in Los Angeles sports arena with daily attendances running into several thousand. On October 16, 1961, the biggest anti-communist rally in history of the country was held in the Hollywood Bowl with a film telecast which subsequently went from coast to coast. The rally lasted 3 hours and was called Hollywood's Answer to Communism. The stage was filled with executives of major studios and many top stars. George Murphy, who would go on to become a U.S. Senator, was the MC. The rally practically monopolized the TV audience in everywhere it was shown. In many cities, it was rebroadcast, and New York aired it twice. The rally had 4 speakers. They were Senators Thomas Dodd, Congressman Walter Judd, Dr. Fred Schwartz, and Cleon Skousen. Before Skousen went on, one of the top executives of Life magazine asked for a few moments' time. Life had been ridiculing these seminars in recent editorials. Let me stop for a second. Understand that Life magazine was started by a Nazi sympathizer and a German immigrant. But when advertisers began canceling contracts running into hundreds of thousands of dollars, the head of Life magazine rushed out to Hollywood to appear on the program and to assure the country that Life wanted to be counted among the patriots. When Skousen's turn came to speak, something unexpected occurred. It was his assignment to outline some of the practical steps which could be taken to protect the American people from further communist subversion. His first suggestion was that we demand a full-scale bipartisan investigation of the entire U.S. State Department. The crowd rose up in such a roar of approval that they virtually took over the program. Several minutes passed before they sat down again. 4 other suggestions were also greeted with overtures of approval, but it was clearly evident that the investigation of the State Department... Hang on one second. Where was that? That the State Department was number one. But it was clearly evident that the investigation of the State Department was number one on their list. As we learned earlier, it was this particular part of the broadcast which upset the establishment more than anything else. Within just a few days, there was a tremendous reaction from New York. And so I'll paraphrase what they did. So basically, they used the people that were lobbyists to approach Attorney General Robert Kennedy and outline steps which should be taken to promptly stop this highly embarrassing exposure of the inner sanctum. Not since the days of Joseph McCarthy had the members of the secret power elite been so emotionally disturbed. So basically what happened is that there was this I'm not going to say a January 6th, because that's a different thing. But there was this grassroots movement that Americans were pushing back against how communism had started to take over parts of the government and almost completely taken over the State Department.
People need to understand, the Red Scare, we learned about it in high school, maybe junior high, and it wasn't real. It wasn't. No.
But what's funny is that when you hear about it through Hollywood, it's always sympathetic toward these actors and these playwrights and these people in entertainment that sympathize with that communist shit.
Well, the deal is this.
That movie, Good Night, Good Luck, was like that.
Well, no, what I was going to say is the deal. You got Paul Robeson. You got a lot of people who the reason is because they're like, look, there's a lot of poor people in America and they're not getting their fair share and this, that, and other. And communism would fix that. That's bullshit. Communism doesn't fix it. It just makes everybody poor. So we're all at the same level. That's the concept. But the issue is when you look at the Democratic Party, many of those members of the Democratic Party were found to be communists. This is a real thing. Many of these members in Hollywood were found to be communists. Some of that Red Scare, there were people that lost their careers that were not communists. That's where the fear comes in. But then what about the 87% that were communists that lost their careers? And so I don't have a problem with you being a communist. That's the beauty of America. You can be one. You can talk about it. You can do all that shit. But be careful about pushing that shit on people because, like I said, there's a book out there, Communism in the Negro, where they said that the Negro was being used by China to push this shit. And so you got to understand, this shit ain't better. It's just a hustle. And the other thing when you talk to your kids about the shit, look. When I was into the Black Panther Party and they were talking about socialism and shit, I got into it. But all the motherfuckers are now like, nah, the ones that are still alive, they're not into that shit. But everybody gets into it at one point. But the conversation I had to have with my daughter was, so what you're saying is this country's fucked up and people are, and the government is this, and this, making bad decisions. But now you want to go to socialism where you give the government all the power to make the same decisions. So what makes you think under socialism they're going to make the right decisions, but under capitalism they're making the wrong decisions? She paused and thought, yeah, exactly. You're giving more power to the people who are fucking you over now. How does that fix anything? And again, like I said, we talked about it in the past. I've had whole discussions on Facebook with people about socialism. But that's because they were at they're that 16 to 27, maybe 31, where they finally find out about it. They've done some reading about it, and they know that the Black Panthers, they know that some of these people were into that shit back then. And you got to understand that once you realize who's really pulling the strings, once you do your research and you find out about Richard Aoki, once you do your research and you find out about this different shit, you're like, oh, yeah, socialism didn't work. It's a good idea, but it's one of these principles that does not work in this world, in the physical realm. A lot of shit we like is I don't want to say fantasy. That's not the word. A lot of shit we like is glorified and
exotic.
It's put on a pedestal.
It's like the quote from earlier where one country's socialist regime is another country's exotica.
Yeah, that's
so.
Deep.
But then I'm going to repeat this again. What can be documented is the fact that What can be documented is the fact that McCarthy was finding not only communists, but those who were hiring communists, promoting communists, hiding communists, and lying under oath to protect communists. There you go.
But like I said, my only issue is America is about freedom. So if you like communism and you want it,
if you like communism, you don't like freedom.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm fully aware. But what I'm saying is, freedom of speech is a motherfucker. And so if you were digging communism to make a suburb of New York that's just communist, and y'all can run it the way y'all want, motherfucker, or you buy you a little plot of land and do that shit. But quit trying to push that shit on the whole country, because that's been the issue this entire time. Even right now, our big gripes are there's 3 major cities, New York, Chicago, and LA, and they love to think that whatever works in those states, in those cities, everybody should have that, even though other people don't want it. Even though other people are fully aware of what goes on there, but it doesn't suit their needs. That's what makes America special with all these different states. You can find a state that agrees with you. And if you don't, you can join the government and fix it. But the bottom line is this whole communism socialism shit is a hustle to make you think that I don't want to take care of myself. The people that like that shit are the ones who don't trust their kids. The ones who didn't raise their kids right. Like, hey, we need socialism because my kid ain't never going to be able to take care of themselves. That's that shit that we talk. You always make fun of those helicopter parents. These are the motherfuckers. These motherfuckers who want to change laws are the ones who know their kids aren't shit. Who know that the
So
children they
then
raise.
think of communism as helicopter parents for everybody.
Everybody. And even to this day in the city, with there's so many damn laws on the books that you can't possibly know every law. You'll fuck around and water your grass on the wrong day. You'll walk your dog on. That's because the more laws a society has, the more corrupt it is. That's been proven over and over. I'm saying there are some laws that we need based on the fact, like, oh man, people are dicks. But the fact of the matter is, the more laws you got, no man, it shit don't even add up, man. It don't make sense. Look, like my brother calls it crappy architecture because he's telling you that you literally are staring shit in the face that could alter your life for the better, but because of this short history, you'll let no, I'm lazy. Oh no, I'll do this. Oh no, I'm not going to change my bed. I can't seem to get over this cold. Yeah, because you're a fucking idiot and you won't subscribe to shit that can really help you physically. I get migraines. Well, maybe that's because your brain, your head is facing the wrong direction when you sleep. Maybe that's what it is. And maybe there's too much magnetism sucking this in the wrong. This shit has been proven, but it's not because it wasn't taught to you now. You really fuck around and you abandon things that can actually make your life better.
So then people need to learn more about ways to heal themselves using metaphysical procedures to adjust the subtle energetic vibrations of their place or to create an environment that is more conducive for the desired use of the place and the well-being of humans and plants and animals in that space. So then,
they're not being taught that on purpose because they want to take their money. They want to take their health and their money. If you're not healthy, you're spending money on medicine. If you're not healthy, you're spending money on medical procedures that don't do shit. If you're not healthy, but you don't realize, how do I say it? You've been unhealthy so long that you think this is the healthy. Like, if you're in a bad relationship, you argue so much that you forget what it's like to be normal. And that your normal is some fucked up shit. Our normal is some fucked up shit.
So that's why space clearing is important. And it's the process to shift the energetic tone of a place or release unwanted residual energies from places or from the previous occupants of disembodied spirits. That's some shit that people never really talk about because it's like, yo, there's some bad mojo that went down. Sometimes you can go into a place and be like, somebody got murdered here. You know what I'm saying?
You can feel the heaviness.
I wound up at a crime scene one time after they had removed the body. And what had happened is they didn't call a professional crime scene cleaner. They had called me in there to remove some items from the house. And I go in there and I see this bed.
Plasma sitting there.
There's plasma in the bed, but then there was like the gunshot wound to the head at the headboard. And the energy in that room was heavier than the biggest concrete building ever made. And I walked in there, I'm like, nope, I'm not doing this. And I called him, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do this. You can fire me if you want to, but I'm not doing this shit. So
yeah, this ain't me.
And I was like, you know what? This ain't worth my well-being. This isn't worth my peace of mind. I quit. I'm not going to do this job if this is what I got to do.
Hold it. I'm not dissing anybody that does.
No. But if that's not the job I'm tasked to do, and you didn't tell me about this shit, I'm like, no. The crazy part about it is the homeowner wasn't there. And they were being a big-time asshole for no apparent reason. And so I get there, and I'm like, oh, this is what happened here. I see. This is why you're behaving like this. Maybe you had something to do instrumentally with the death of this person. I don't know. But I'm not going to be a part of this.
Nope. Look, you ain't tripping. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, when you walk into certain situations and you can feel it. Look, I'll give an example, like relationship-wise. You ever get in a relationship, beautiful chick, she's cool, whatever, but the argument she's having with you right now is not with you, it's with her past. And I'll sit there and tell like, look, you know what? Don't argue with your ex. She's like, what do you mean? Like, look, you're arguing with your ex. This is an argument because of something this motherfucker did. Now that you're wary about this, don't bring that. Yeah, that's your baggage. I'm not about to argue with you about something that I didn't do wrong. But because of this other motherfucker did some shit, you didn't address it then. Now that you're like, hey, I'm not gonna make the same mistakes. You can't possibly make the same mistakes with me because I ain't that same nigga. I'm not trying to get over on you. So call that motherfucker up and argue with him, but don't argue with me about some shit that nigga did. I'm not allowing it. And that's that residual energy. That's that what you walked in with some shit left over from somebody else, and they want you to clean it up. They didn't even tell you to clean it up.
You got to clear spaces sometimes. You know what I'm saying? New places that you move into. Go into a place and say the Lord's Prayer. Burn some sage.
Yeah,
burn some sage and go through the house and pray as you go through. But you can't just go into one part of the house. You got to go through the entire house.
Yeah, so take that shit loose.
You also have to have knowledge of things such as earth rhythms, finding the right time for human activities, or scientific and mythological knowledge that guides humans to ride the waves of natural cycles of the sun, the moon, and the earth to be more productive and connected to the earth. For example, farming. There is the right time to sow seeds. There's a time to cultivate, and there's a time to harvest. Now, if you don't have a crop that isn't supposed to be harvested in the middle of winter, then you shouldn't do it at the time because you're fighting an uphill battle at that point. You want to go with the flow of nature, and you can ride it like a wave. There are natural calendars of indigenous people, and they provide a way for non-native people to shift away from calendars that reflect irrelevant seasonal changes in the old country and become aware of local rhythms of nature. So, like I was talking about, there's seasonal and lunar, activities or cycles to when you should, plant and harvest and begin new projects, not just for agriculture, but new projects. When you're starting a new project, it's good to begin it with the new moon, because then it will reach its fruition or cycles of fruition with every full moon. When to rest, when to repair, when to reflect. And then, you have other things that affect it, because Feng Shui affects the energy of a space. And the energy of that space affects the energy inside your vessel. And so this social geomancy and the application of principles and models that help us to enhance our sense of place to functioning as social institutions, businesses, or community groups. So this idea of community. So, for example, if every October, you have a farm and you invite families to come in and pick apples, and they can get apples, it becomes a tradition where people bring their kids to a farm and they pick apples, or they buy some apple cider. But it gets people out of the house. They're doing things together. They're meeting people face to face. They're having a good time. All these things are relationship, community building experiences. When I was a kid, there were different examples of these things that got people out of the house to go and do things. And sometimes they're sporting events. Sometimes, we would go up to the nearby high school for a football game.
But we create these traditions so that we can do the Feng Shui, or like, it's time, but I'm not in the mood yet. You got to get out the house. You got to get charged. You need the sunlight. You got to get out the house. It's the moon. So we create some of these traditions are created on that behalf. We probably just don't realize it, or we don't realize what was behind them. You know what I'm saying? But it's important that we know these things. Maybe not the how, but the why is still very important. And once you lose that, the next thing you know, you're building your house on a fault line. They don't realize it.
So fault lines and ley lines, and then also water tables. So, okay, as I told you, our house was built on the side of a hill, facing water, just like they say is auspicious in Feng Shui. And I think it's part of the reason why we have such a good childhood, because your house also was behind a hill. Excuse me, in front of a hill, Manderson, which was basically you had a big hill behind you, and you were facing water, the field. You know what I'm saying?
But the deep shit that you're saying right now is so profound. I'm trying to verbalize this. So literally, we have things that we learned as a culture, as a society, that you should build your house here and not build there. And as we grew up, we saw that field. It was water. We
played in it. We played in it all the time.
Yeah. My mom told me they can't build houses over there. The water table's too high. So what do you do when your arrogance kicks in and like, this is a great place for houses. We can put more houses here.
You know, it would be interesting to like study
those
people.
Basements. They got a flood.
No. There's no basements over there, but like to study the people who live on top of water tables.
Look, those houses got basements. Homie, tell me, go look at them. You see all I'm saying is that we were told that that's not a good thing. Whether it was the fact that there's a water table over there, which means there's water.
What's crazy though is like you never had any water issues in your basement though. And neither did I.
Never. I didn't start having water problems till I bought the duplex.
Mm-hmm.
And one time it didn't flood, but there was a bunch of water. And so I used that dry lock and I painted the whole basement so it wouldn't happen. But the bottom line is that literally there's a cultural significance to this that you shouldn't build over there because there's water there and that is making the feng shui for this whole neighborhood. But instead you deny that, build houses there. On top of stuff, I'm trying to tell you, those houses ain't solid. They're going to have cracked foundations. They're going to have water in their basement at some point. But the problem is, it might be 20 years from now.
But it's crazy because this information is all around us. The Great Pyramids use the most supreme geomancy on the planet to build these 3 structures that are essentially power plants, and more than just power plants, but like pressure valves for the planet. So
they balance the whole planet,
the energy of the planet. And when you do not take things like this into account, and you're living out of balance, then you pay for it. You pay for it financially. Straight up, you do. You end up like having all these problems and you got to pay for it. And then you end up passing it on to somebody else who pays for it. And all because lack of wisdom. Not knowledge, wisdom.
This is when these kids don't listen to their grandparents. This is when, somebody...
That's when people build their homes in a floodplain or in a tornado alley. But this is what we're talking about in the show. It's all comes back to ugly architecture and how ugly architecture is being used to oppress you, and ugly art is being used to lower the bar for creativity.
Look, the reason you're unhealthy, the reason you're broke, the reason that your family can't seem to stop dating and procreating with the dumbest motherfuckers is because of this shit right here. No, serious.
That's powerful.
Yeah, why am I doing? Because you are literally going against your ancestors. You're literally going against past knowledge. You're not having a. I remember, you know how old guys used to tell you, you're tripping over your own dick. You're like, what does that mean? What it means is you got a big dick, but you can't use it. You got all this information and knowledge.
You're letting it lead you around to making bad decisions where you fall on your face.
You're letting the wrong head lead you. That's what the world is doing right now. So until you recognize that and do something about it, you can recognize that I'm with the wrong bitch, but you stay with her. Ooh.
Harmonize your life. Learn about geomancy. Apply some feng shui to your everyday life. That's all I got. We out. Peace.
Holla back.